Hey everybody, welcome to First Congregational Church's online service. My name is Dr. Tom. Good to see you. We're in our final summer series, Bad Religion, and this is the last one. And now this series was from the Gospel of Luke, and it continues with Jesus' Passover pilgrimage on the road to Jerusalem in preparation for the crucifixion. As he gets nearer to the city and his own death, he starts to identify some bad religion on the way that needs correction. Now today, Jesus turns to a whole host of people that's following him, turns to him and says some really controversial things. Again, go figure. Now let's remember that Luke 9 through 19 is called the traveling narrative. The bulk of Luke's narrative and gospel covers Jesus' journey to Jerusalem for the Passover, in which he will be crucified. Now there's the birth narratives, a small section about when he was 12 in the temple, impressing all the leaders with his questions and knowledge while his parents are freaking out. Next up, John the Baptist is declaring him the Messiah, and then Christ heads out into the wilderness for testing. So it's not until like halfway through chapter 4 that Jesus actually begins public ministry. Then he goes around breaking all the rules and teaching the folks he shouldn't be teaching and healing folks that shouldn't be healed when he shouldn't be doing it, talking to folks who shouldn't be talked to, raising people to life who should be dead, etc. And Herod, the political leader of the area, is really confused about Jesus. Now the Pharisees are mad about Jesus, so we only really get roughly 4 chapters of Jesus' ministry, covering like 3 years of his life before he's declared the Messiah and then reveals that he must go and die in Jerusalem. And then we get 10 chapters of him traveling to Jerusalem for the upcoming high holiday of the Passover. Now that was the biggest day of the year for this culture, where every single Hebrew man is required by law to be present at the temple to offer a sacrifice for his family unit and cover the sins of his family for a whole year. Now the population of Jerusalem grew in this time during this holiday from like roughly 30,000 to as much as 750,000 people. Jesus and his disciples go on this pilgrimage to Jerusalem with thousands of others from all over the world converging upon this one city. And Jesus is teaching and doing miracles and being all controversial along the way. And it says that thousands of these pilgrims start to join his traveling party to journey together to the Passover. Now, this group of Hebrew folk, they believe that Jesus is the promised Messiah, promised by Moses, described by the prophets and all that. But it is important to remember that Jesus is not the only person in their memory who has been declared the Messiah. Many have come before him to lead a small group that was an uprising against the Roman occupying military in attempts to earn their independence from Rome militarily. And it usually ended in the crucifixion of this Messiah figure and a few of the key followers, and then everyone disperses. And then a general disappointment settled in to the folks and the people. Now they all unanimously believed that the Messiah would come and claim the throne of David, and which would in turn dethrone the Herod brothers from their puppet rule and governorship for Caesar. And then he would cleanse the temple of the corrupt money-making system that the Sadducees got filthy, stinking rich off of. And then he would rally the people together in a military rebellion against Rome and win their independence. And what better time to do this than when every single Hebrew man is already in Jerusalem ready to go. But Jesus says, I go to be crucified. And then Peter says, oh no you don't. And all those following Jesus want something from him. So he turns to the crowd as everyone's following him, and he says something really hard and difficult. Thus, today's passage. Now, we all want to belong. It's a natural instinct that our evolutionary process has wired into our DNA. At the dawn of human history, if you didn't belong to a group, you were most likely going to die. Like it was you versus the world of saber-toothed tigers and famine and drought and scarcity and a host of other threats that most likely you're not going to be able to survive alone within. So we banded together in tribes to hunt and farm and protect one another. A sense of belonging is still a powerful force, so we continue to organize tribes like sports teams and church communities and political parties and job unions and families and hobbyist clubs and all this stuff. Now, these tribes provide us with a sense of a shared value system that upholds a common vision or cause or love or interest. So Jesus says something that directly challenges the current tribal group that follows him in this group. He says that unless you hate your mother and father, wife and children, brother and sister, and yes, even your own life, you cannot be my disciple. How do we even interpret this tough passage? This is one of the toughest passages that theologians have wrestled with for centuries. Now, some theories. The word hate, hate your family to follow Jesus, means just love them less in comparison to your great love of God, which is going to be hatred in comparison to the great love you have, right? Another is that it's just Jewish hyperbole teaching, not meant to be taken literally. Now, both of these might have some kind of truth in them, but this challenging passage has been used abusively in the past by religious organizations and leaders that demand loyalty and sacrifice for the tribe at the expense of one's family. After all, hasn't Jesus said? And then they quote the passage, right? Okay, so what about the command to love your mother and father, right in the Ten Commandments? Does that go against what Jesus taught here? What about 1 John saying that if you claim to love God but hate your brother, you are still in darkness? Okay. That's a direct contradiction to what Jesus just taught here, to hate your brother in order to follow Christ. And what about the hero, Ruth, from the Old Testament, who radically bound herself to her widowed mother-in-law, and she ends up being a hero? What about Paul's commendation to Timothy, saying that those who don't care for their family are worse than the outside pagans? Dang, that was tough language there, right? And what of Jesus' critique of the religious system that demands the last 2 mites of a poor widow in order to stay connected with her worship community? See, you can see that we got our work cut out for us in this passage today. It doesn't just directly apply, because so many things start wrestling with it. Okay, so placing it back into context, Jesus is traveling to his death and resurrection. The thousands who are following him are under the assumption that Jesus will give them power, independence, and freedom. He's the Messiah that's going to claim the throne, cleanse the temple, and defeat Rome's military. Now that is why these Hebrew men pilgriming to Passover follow him, because they feel like they're on the bottom getting kicked around and they want to be a part of a tribe that's going to dominate the world. But the vision that Jesus has in mind is one where every tribe and every nation and every tongue are a part of it. Power and position may come to you along with the temptation to wield that for your own benefit at the expense of another, but if you want to be a follower of Christ, you have to hate your tribe in order to love the world like God does. And you have to hate your own life, as in your status and your power and your influence, in order to love your neighbor like Christ did. You cannot love your political or religious affiliations more than your neighbor who might have different ones than you. So we need to count the cost of what it means to follow Christ, because it costs more than it pays out, feels like. Now Jesus says specifically, you must carry your cross and follow me. Now this language today has positive religious tones of those who are really serious about their faith and willing to make great sacrifices for the cause of Christ, right? But this had the opposite effect on the ears of these listeners, because they had tribal dreams of prominence and dominance. And, we will take power and wield it upon the world, making it a place that God is pleased with. That's what they had a vision of. Anyone who gets in the way of that, God's going to judge. And guess what? We just happen to be the instrument of that judgment. Then to hear Jesus say, carry your cross, made no sense. That was the ultimate and humiliating defeat of their plans. To carry a cross meant that you were a political prisoner of Rome set for execution. But we can make the same mistake these folks did. We can transform Jesus' call for self-sacrificial love for the whole world into a tribal affiliation mark. We are willing to carry our cross for a church or for our family or for politics, our nation, our class, our tribe, by making war against the other tribe and assuming that the suffering we endure is for a good cause because, it is the cause of our small little tribe. Our version has a little bit more glory to it than what these hearers would have attributed to it. To them, it's the utter nonsense and lunacy. But on this leg of the journey of Christ's walking to Jerusalem, nobody can follow him. Literally, nobody can endure the crucifixion like him in a manner of love so perfect that it defeats death and leads to the resurrection. So nobody can follow Christ, literally at this passage. That's what he's talking about. He will do it for all of us. So Jesus gets really specific in the next section on counting the cost. He says, who would start a construction on a tower if they hadn't got some estimates on the total cost of it, right? You'd have a half-finished tower as a public monument to your poor planning. Good for you. And who would go to war with an army of 20,000 soldiers if you only had 10,000 soldiers? Nobody. Nobody's going to do that. You would send a delegation to barter a peace treaty if you're really going to do that, right? Now, to me, these two illustrations sounded strangely specific, and they are, for a reason. They actually happened. They're like news headlines of Jesus' day. Herod Antipas, governor of Galilee, did these two things. Now, he wanted to make a city so grand that it would be a Roman capital of the area. He even named it after a Caesar, Tiberius. And he dumped money into it and then opened it up for Hebrew folks to come and live in. And it had a lot of financial incentives and tax cuts so the population could grow and it'd be a glorious city. But he didn't realize that he built the city on top of an ancient burial ground. And Jewish law says that if you step on a grave, you're unclean. So like living on a grave would be like, holy cow. So not many people moved in. And then there was this unfinished tower as a monument to his poor calculations. Also, Herod divorced his first wife and married his brother's wife, causing some strife in his family, especially with his former father-in-law, who was the Nabatean king Ariadas, who then refused to send reinforcements at a critical battle against the Arabs of Petra, resulting in Herod's humiliating defeat. So here we are, two actual news headlines of Jesus' day that he pulls out of his back pocket. So this is a clear criticism of Herod's attempt to dance with the powers of the world for his own small tribe's selfish gains. The attempts to weasel and fight his way to the front of the rat pack just made him a third-place rat. Because the violence of the world is ruthless. You can't use it for God's ends. It does not lead through the crucifixion to resurrection, just to the crucifixion as the end point. Now Jesus claims his way will lead through the crucifixion into resurrection. But those listening to him only hear defeatism at the hands of their enemies, the Romans. But Christ has counted the cost and is willing to pay. So this is not some ultra high standard that we all must adhere to in order to be a follower of Christ. This is a distinction of who can follow Christ through death and the resurrection, which is nobody. That's his path for us that he walks. I was driving around in a Guatemalan neighborhood with a friend and guide who was kind of showing me around his community when we came across a garage sale. Now he stopped and just said, now there's something I've never seen in Guatemala before. Now I was surprised that something as commonplace in my Michigan neighborhoods as a garage sale was something so uncommon that he had never seen one. So I asked, why is that? And his reply stuck with me. It was simple and short. And he said, people don't have excess stuff to sell down here. Now, if you think about it, we live in a throwaway society. Most of the products that we purchase have something called planned obsolescence. That means that it is meant to break. It's in the planning that it's going to break, but only after a long enough period of time that it earns your favor and loyalty to buy that brand again. Things used to be made to be bought once and then passed down for generations and generations. Think of an old, Singer sewing machine or an old typewriter. Then companies learned that if they did that, you never bought that piece again. So they had to learn how long to make something last until it broke. Now a piece breaks, on something that you own, it's actually cheaper to go out and buy a new one than it is to buy the part and hire the repair person to fix it. So when Jesus says the next thing to cap off his teaching, it hits hard on a society that buys lots of stuff. So we got to hear this in their context. So before we hear what he says, we first have this word, therefore. That's the first thing he says. This means that Jesus is about to sum up all the stuff that he was just saying with a punchline meaning. And he says, therefore, no one can be my disciple unless he gives up all his possessions. Okay, another tough one, Jesus. So far, Jesus said that you have to give up your love for tribal affiliations so that you can love the world. And you have to give up your visions of prominence and dominance so that you can love your neighbor. And you have to give up your dancing with the powers of the world to get the upper hand in exchange for self-sacrificial living. Count this cost. It will mean you carry a cross. That's what he said all up to here. And then he gives the punchline, therefore no one can be my disciple unless they give up all their possessions. Like he just said, and here's the price tag I was talking about. Now this word possessions is a Luke favorite. He uses it 22 times between his two books of Luke and Acts. Whereas Mark and John, those gospels don't even use it at all. And Matthew only uses it 3 times. The word itself is weird in its original language. It's a compound word consisting of the words under and rule. Now, a first century farmer wouldn't have possessions like we think of them. They wouldn't have, they would have a house and a plot of land and the items necessary to care for that land and provide themselves food. And if they were a tradesman, they'd have some kind of a tools for the craft. But no one is going to have like a stamp collection or recreation vehicles or like electronics, all that kind of stuff. Their possessions were the things that made up their small kingdom, that were the things under their rule. Hence the word, under rule. Now Luke pays very close attention to the exploitation of the poor and vulnerable right from Mary's Magnificat at the start of this book when she sang that song. And then straight through the book of Acts where everyone sold everything and lived together and no one needed anything. The call to follow the way of Jesus, according to Luke, is not a way that uses their religion to bolster up and build up their own small personal kingdoms, like Herod tried to do at the expense of an enemy tribe or the vulnerable who don't have the opportunity to fight in this war. The way of Christ is to live the pattern of the cross, self-sacrificial, giving, loving, willing to suffer for and with and through the hardships of others. It is to take our small kingdom and offer it as a gift to God for the sake of the world, unafraid of what we could lose and unattached as to what we could gain. So live generously and free and unafraid, because that's what it looks like to follow Christ. Hey, thank you so much for joining us online in our digital space of community. I hope you found some hope, help, and healing, because that's what we're all about. Stay tuned for some couple blooper reels following this recording. They're fun to laugh at, and they're a lot of fun, personally. So if you found this service helpful and identify with the spirit of the teaching here, you can follow us on Facebook, Instagram, subscribe on YouTube. That's where we store all of this stuff. You can even go back and look at stuff that we used to do a couple years ago, which aren't as good as these because we've learned our lessons along the way. So you could do that. And you could give financially to help us out. Any gift would help. There's a link at the bottom of your screen on the way that you can give financially, set up a one-time or a recurring, and you can be a part of us. Join our community from wherever you are in the whole nation or the world. We'd love to have you. And make sure to say hello in the comments below, and we'll see you next week for a brand new series. Yeah, it's called, I can't remember, hold on, wait, it's coming in. Recalibrate. I had to recalibrate my brain at first. Yeah, all right, peace. Really crackly today. You have, all right, I messed that one up. Rate it. Forgot to rewind. Okay, rate it.